In the next part of the video on the two-sample t-test, I'm going to show you some examples of how to do the first way of doing a two-sample t-test, which is called the critical value method. But first, in this video, I want to give you a summary of how the critical value method is going to work for a two-sample t-test. So in the critical value method, what you do is you calculate a statistic called a t-score, and then you look up a critical value from a t-table, and then what you do is you mark the positive critical value, which comes from the table right here on a number line. Then you mark the opposite of that number over here, and it's called the negative critical value. So if you go to the t-table and the number that you get is 1.58, then on the number line you would mark off 1.58 and negative 1.58. And when you mark off the positive and negative critical values on this number line, it separates this number line into three areas. The area at the left that starts at the negative critical value is called the negative rejection region, and the area in between the two critical values is called the non-rejection region, and the area that starts at the positive critical value and goes out to the right is called the positive rejection region. And the negative rejection region includes the negative critical value. So this tick mark right here is actually a part of the negative rejection region, and this tick mark out here is a part of the positive rejection region. So the non-rejection region is just everything in between the two critical values. Once you calculate the t-score using the formula, you check which area contains your t-score, and your t-score will either be in the negative region, the non-rejection region, or in the positive rejection region. And the decision that you reach depends on which of the three areas contains the t-score that you calculated. So if your t-score is in the negative rejection region, you reject the null hypothesis because it's one of the rejection regions, and you conclude that the mean of population 1 is lower than the mean of population 2. You confidently conclude that. And notice how when you reach this conclusion, that's rejecting the null hypothesis, because in a two-sample t-test, the null hypothesis is a possibility that the population means are equal, that there's no difference between the population means. And if you're concluding that the mean of population 1 is lower than the mean of population 2, you're rejecting the possibility that the population means are equal. And that means you're rejecting the null hypothesis. You're rejecting the possibility of them being equal and concluding that there's a difference going in this direction. If the t-score is in the positive rejection region, you reject the null hypothesis and you make the opposite conclusion. You confidently conclude that the mean of population 1 is higher than the mean of population 2. And notice how this is also rejecting the null hypothesis, because if this is your conclusion, you're rejecting the possibility that the population means are equal. You're concluding that there is a difference. And if the t-score is in the non-rejection region, then what you do is you retain the null hypothesis. In other words, you retain the possibility that the population means are equal, because you're not confident enough to conclude that they're different, and your final conclusion is just that you're not confident enough to say that the population means are different. The data doesn't support that conclusion, or the data isn't showing strong enough evidence to support that conclusion. So you're just going to assume that the population means are not equal and just give that the benefit of the doubt. So once again, in a two-sample t-test using the critical value method, you calculate the t-score using the formula, and it's based on your data. Then you look up the critical value from the t-table, and you mark off the critical value and its opposite on a number line, and that separates the number line into three areas. Then you look at which area contains your t-score, and then that leads you to one of these three outcomes that I just described. And that's how the two-sample t-test works using this method.